Welcome to Learn English Now. Ready to level up your English? Here we learn through stories, slow, clear, and fun. Listen, relax, and enjoy the journey. One introduction. The city is Anchorage in Alaska. It is a cold place, but today it is the center of the world's attention. A very important meeting is happening here. On a large wall, a sign says "Pursuing Peace." This is the hope for this meeting. Everyone wants peace. The world is waiting for two leaders, President Donald Trump from the United States and President Vladimir Putin from Russia. They're here for a special summit. The two presidents arrive for their first meeting in person in many years. The last time they met was a long time ago. Now they will talk again. The situation is very serious because there is a war in Ukraine. This war has continued for a long time. Many people are watching this summit on television and online. They want to know what the two leaders will say to each other. The meeting is very important for the future of many countries. The stakes are very high. A big question is on everyone's mind. Can this meeting stop the fighting? Can it bring peace to Ukraine? The leaders will meet for nearly 3 hours. They will talk behind closed doors, so nobody will know what they say during their discussion. After their private talk, they will speak to the public, but what they will announce is a big mystery. The results of the summit are not clear at all. This meeting could change everything, or it could change nothing. The hopes are high, but the problems are very big. President Trump said he wanted a ceasefire, but that is not a reality yet. The main question is simple. Can this meeting in Alaska really create a path to peace? The whole world is waiting for an answer. The answer will come after the long talk between the two powerful men ends to the road to the summit. The summit in Alaska was a surprise for many people. It was organized very quickly. Usually, meetings between world leaders take many months to plan, but this time something was different. There was a new feeling of hope. Diplomats worked fast because they believed a big step towards peace was possible. This hope was the reason the two presidents decided to meet so soon in the cold city of Anchorage. The person at the center of this hope was Steve Witkoff. He was President Trump's special envoy. His job was to travel and talk to other countries for the president. Mr. Witkoff was not a very experienced diplomat. He was new to these kinds of important, high-level talks. Some leaders in Europe worried that he did not have enough experience for such a difficult job, especially when talking with a leader like President Putin. Mr. Witkoff traveled to Russia for talks with President Putin. After their meeting, a critical misunderstanding happened. He believed he heard something very important. He thought Russia was ready to make a special offer. He understood that Russia would pull its soldiers out of 2 areas in Ukraine, Kherson and Zaporizhia. This would be a peaceful withdrawal. But this was a big mistake. President Putin did not say that. Instead, he demanded that Ukraine must pull its own soldiers out of those same areas. One message was about Russia leaving. The other message was about Ukraine leaving. It was a very serious error. With this wrong information, Mr. Witkoff spoke to American allies and to Ukraine. He told them the good news he thought he had. He said that Russia was offering to move its troops back. This created false hope for a breakthrough. Leaders in Europe and Ukraine were excited. They believed that Russia was finally ready to end the fighting in those regions. This news made everyone think that a real peace agreement was close, maybe closer than ever before. This powerful but mistaken hope was the main reason for the Alaska summit, because everyone believed a deal was possible. Diplomatic efforts moved very fast. Officials quickly organized the meeting between President Trump and President Putin. They wanted to use this positive moment to make a real agreement. The world watched as the plans came together. The road to the summit was built on a mistake, but for a short time it gave many people a reason to believe that peace was finally possible. 3A meeting on the tarmac. The large Russian airplane landed smoothly in Anchorage, Alaska, under a clear northern sky. The world watched as President Putin's plane came to a stop on the tarmac at Elmendorf Air Force Base. President Trump was already there, waiting to welcome the Russian leader. The American government prepared a very special and formal welcome for this important event. A long, bright red carpet was rolled out on the ground. It stretched from the steps of the plane to the waiting cars. High above, American fighter jets flew over the airport in a powerful display. This was a sign of respect for the important visitor. On a nearby wall, a big sign showed the words "Pursuing Peace." This was the official and hopeful message for the summit. President Putin appeared at the door of his plane and walked slowly down the steps. President Trump walked forward on the red carpet to greet him. The two men met in the middle and shook hands firmly. This handshake was a very important image for the world's media. Many photographers and television cameras recorded the moment carefully. It was their first meeting in person for several years, so the handshake was very significant. They stood for a moment, showing a friendly face to the public before their difficult private talks began. The greeting was formal and looked hopeful, but everyone knew the issues were extremely serious. After the public greeting, the two leaders walked side by side to the American presidential car. This special black car is famous around the world and has the nickname the Beast. It is a very strong and secure vehicle designed to protect the president. President Trump invited President Putin to ride with him to the summit location. They got into the back of the car together. This was a symbolic action, showing they were ready to talk. It also gave them their first chance to speak privately, away from all the cameras and reporters on the way to their meeting. However, there was a dark contrast to this carefully planned welcome. At the exact same time the presidents were shaking hands in Alaska, people far away in Ukraine were receiving urgent warnings. Alerts on their phones told them that Russian drones and aircraft were flying over their country. The war was not stopping for the summit. This was a clear sign of the serious problems the leaders needed to discuss. While President Trump offered a warm welcome on American land, the conflict continued without a pause. The peaceful picture on the tarmac was very different from the dangerous and frightening reality for people in Ukraine. For the long talk, the doors to the big meeting room closed. Inside, President Trump and President Putin sat across a long, polished table from each other. No one else was in the room with them, only their translators to help them understand one another. The world waited outside for any news. The meeting was very long. It lasted for nearly 3 hours without a break. The two leaders had many important and difficult things to discuss. They knew that people everywhere were hoping for a good result from this talk. The main topic, of course, was the war in Ukraine. This was the whole reason for the summit in Alaska. They talked for a long time about how to stop the fighting. President Trump said he wanted a ceasefire to start soon. A ceasefire is an agreement to stop shooting and fighting. They also talked about security for Ukraine. This means keeping the country safe in the future, so a war does not happen again. Another very difficult subject was land. They discussed which country should control certain areas. These were the most important and sensitive subjects of their long talk. The two leaders had different styles of negotiation. President Trump was very direct and spoke about his goals clearly. He wanted to make a deal quickly and show a result. President Putin was quieter and very careful with his words. He listened a lot before he spoke and explained his country's position in great detail. 4 hours, they went back and forth, discussing each point. It was a difficult conversation because they had very different ideas about the same problems. They needed all that time to try and understand each other's views. They found some common ground. They both agreed that the meeting itself was productive and a useful step. They found agreement on many smaller points that could help build trust between their two countries. They felt they made some real progress on the path to peace. President Trump later said they agreed on most things. This gave a small amount of hope to the world. Both leaders wanted to continue the conversation in the future. They agreed that talking was much better than fighting and that this meeting was a necessary start, but they could not agree on the biggest issues. There were a few large problems they could not solve in one afternoon. The most significant problem was how to create a final peace deal that everyone, including Ukraine, could accept. They did not agree on all the important details for a ceasefire. They did not have a clear, final plan for the security of Ukraine that both sides liked. They made progress, but they did not make a deal. After almost 3 hours, their long talk was over. The doors opened, and the two presidents walked out to face the cameras and reporters. 5 different stories. After almost 3 hours, the meeting was over. President Trump and President Putin walked out of the room. They went to a stage where many reporters were waiting. The world was wide. Watching, everyone wanted to know what happened in the long talk. Did they find a way to end the war? Did they have a plan for peace? The room was full of cameras and journalists ready to write down every word. The leaders stood together under the bright lights. The big sign behind them said "Pursuing Peace." Now it was time to hear the results of the summit. President Putin spoke first. He looked at the reporters and said that the meeting was good. He told them that he and President Trump made an agreement. He said this agreement will help to pave the path toward peace in Ukraine. His words gave people hope. It sounded like the two leaders found a solution. The world listened carefully to his positive message. Maybe the long meeting in Alaska was a success. Then it was President Trump's turn to speak. He stood at the microphone after Putin. He also said the meeting was productive. He said there were many points that we agreed on. Most of them, I would say. But then he said something very different from President Putin. He told the reporters there's no deal until there's a deal. This was a surprise. Putin said there was an agreement. Trump said there was no deal. The reporters in the room were confused. They looked at each other. What was the real story? Did they agree or not? The two leaders had different messages. President Trump tried to explain more. He said they agreed on many small things, but he also said, a couple of big ones that we haven't quite gotten there, but we've made some headway. This meant they still did not agree on the most important issues. The hope for a clear plan for peace started to disappear. The situation was very unclear. Before anyone could understand what was happening, the press conference was over. The two leaders did not answer any questions from the media. The reporters shouted questions, but Trump and Putin just turned and walked off the stage. They left the room full of confused people. The summit in Alaska ended suddenly. It did not have a clear result. The world has two different stories and no real answers. 6. The world reacts. After the confusing press conference in Alaska, the world reacted. Leaders from many countries watched the news. They wanted to understand what happened in the meeting between President Trump and President Putin. The two men met for almost 3 hours, but their final words were very different. This left governments around the world with many questions. Some people felt a little hope for peace, but many more felt worried and uncertain. The lack of clear agreement made everyone nervous about the future. In Ukraine, the reaction was strong and clear. The country's leader, President Volodymyr Zelensky, was not at the summit. He was not invited to join the important conversation about his own country's war. Before the meeting even started, President Zelensky had made a public statement. He warned that any decisions made in his absence would be meaningless. For him, a deal about Ukraine without Ukraine was not a real deal. People across Ukraine shared his concern. They were anxious because their future was being discussed by other thousands of miles away. It was a very stressful time for the Ukrainian people who waited for any real news. America's allies in Europe and at NATO also watched the events carefully. They were very cautious in their public statements. They did not want to say the meeting was good or bad until they knew more. The allies were confused by the conflicting messages. President Putin told the world they had found a path to peace, but moments later, President Trump said there was no deal yet. This contradiction made it impossible for other leaders to understand the result. They needed clarity. There was also concern among some allies. They saw President Putin receiving a grand formal welcome in the United States. This welcome seemed to bring him back to the center of world politics, even as his army continued to fight in Ukraine. President Trump knew that other leaders needed answers. He understood that President Zelensky and the European allies were waiting anxiously for information. So, after the summit ended, he made a public promise. He told reporters that he would call President Zelensky very soon. He also announced that he would speak with the leaders of the NATO countries. Trump planned to share the details from his long, private talk with Putin. The world now waited for these important phone calls. Everyone hoped the calls would finally explain what really happened in Alaska 7. The message for home after the long day of talks in Alaska, President Trump did not rest. He sat down for a television interview. Millions of people in America and around the world were watching. They wanted to understand what really happened in the meeting with President Putin. The press conference earlier was short and confusing. People hoped the interview would give them clear answers about the path to peace. The room was quiet as the interviewer started with the most important question. The interviewer asked, "What is your message for Ukraine? What should President Zelensky do now?" Trump's answer was very direct. He looked straight into the camera, as if he was speaking only to the Ukrainian leader. He said his advice was simple. "Gotta make a deal," he said. The words were clear. The message was that Ukraine needed to find an agreement with Russia to stop the war. President Trump stressed that Ukraine has to agree to it. He did not explain what kind of deal it should be. He did not talk about land or security. He just put the responsibility on Ukraine to make a choice. For many people listening, it felt like a lot of pressure on a country that was already at war. Then the interviewer asked about the future. Was there a next step? Trump shared some surprising news. He announced a plan for a new, bigger meeting. This meeting would be different from the one in Alaska. He said it would not be just him and President Putin. This time, President Zelensky of Ukraine would be invited. Trump said he would be at this important three-person meeting, too. "They both want me there, and I'll be there," he said with confidence. This was the first time anyone had heard about this plan. A meeting with the leaders of Russia, Ukraine, and the United States together seemed like a real opportunity. It offered a small light of hope after a very uncertain day. But then the conversation took a strange turn after talking about the huge international problem of the war. President Trump suddenly changed the topic. He started to talk about American politics. It was a big surprise for the interviewer and for everyone watching at home. He was not talking about Ukraine or Russia anymore. He began to talk about elections in the United States. He spoke about mail-in voting, which is when people send their votes through the post office instead of going to a voting place. Trump told the interviewer what President Putin said to him during their private talk. Vladimir Putin, smart guy, said, "You can't have an honest election with mail-in voting," Trump explained. He said that Putin believed it was not a safe or fair way to vote. Trump continued to explain Putin's idea. He said that when a vote goes through the mail, it passes through many different hands. He said it cannot be honest. He then compared it to voting in person, which he said was much better. It was very unusual for an American president to use the Russian leader's opinion to criticize his own country's election system. The message for home was not just about peace in another country. It was also a political message for his own people. What happens next? The planes have left Alaska. The big summit is over. For a moment, the world hoped for a big change. But after President Trump and President Putin went home, there were more questions than answers. What did the long meeting really achieve? The path forward was not clear at all. Both leaders used positive words after their talk. They said their meeting was productive. They said they made progress on difficult topics. This gave some people hope. Maybe they agreed on smaller things, even if they could not agree on the war. President Putin spoke about a new path toward peace. This sounded like a very big step forward. But then President Trump gave a different message to the world. He said there's no deal until there's a deal. This simple sentence showed the real situation. There was no sign paper. There was no ceasefire to stop the fighting. The war in Ukraine continued even while the two leaders were meeting. For the people in Ukraine, the summit did not bring the peace they needed. The friendly handshake on the red carpet did not stop the conflict. The next step was a series of phone calls. President Trump promised he would talk to President Zelensky of Ukraine soon. This was very important because Zelensky was not at the meeting. His country was the subject of the long talk, but he was not in the room. Trump also said he would call leaders in Europe to tell them about the discussion. The world waited to hear what he would say on these calls. Trump also gave the world a new idea to think about. He suggested a future summit. This one would be different. It would be a meeting with three leaders, Trump, Putin, and Zelensky. He said both leaders wanted him there to help. This was a new opportunity for real talk, but it was just an idea. There was no date and no firm plan, so the Alaska summit ended in a place of uncertainty. It showed that talking is possible, but it also showed how difficult it is to find real solutions. The world was left waiting for the next action. Will the phone calls lead to something more? Is a meeting with three leaders a real possibility? For now, nobody knows the answers. The future of peace is still a question.